In Valorant, a really relevant topic of late has been the topic of 100 Thieves roster and, you know, having these changes and the quick succession. And we can also extend that to what G2 have been doing between Kellogg's and Mixwell. But I wanted to talk about and have a discussion about whether constant roster changes are good for esports. And I'm not just going to be looking at Valorant, and nor are we just going to be looking at whether or not that will cause a team to perform well. But I think overall it's quite an important and necessary topic. So basically the thing that has ticked this off is the other day I was reading r/League of Legends. I needed my daily dose of toxicity, and there was a post that had been put up about how the LCS viewership was down compared to the spring 2021 split. I think the original post was phrased a little bit unfairly in the way that they chose their statistics wasn't quite right, but the comments themselves were actually incredibly interesting, and there was one thing that kept coming up as a pattern, and that was people saying that with so many teams blowing up their rosters and constantly changing them, they found it really hard to be invested or care about what was happening in the league. So one of the top comments, for example, was this one from Jesus Gifted Me Head. I was so ready to buy a FlyQuest jersey after their back-to-back finals appearances, but then they blew up the roster. Same with Golden Guardians when they had Damonte, I don't know anything about League of Legends, and Haunter. I know people come and go in sports, but LCS, it just happens too fast. Response from Stop Taking My Data said, I've felt similar for a while. It's hard to cheer for a team and keep interested when half the time they're not even a team by the next year. The C9 situation was the pinnacle of this. What's frustrating is that we are changing all these people constantly killing narratives, and the trade-off is not even going far in Worlds, so what's the point really? This isn't a one-off thing. People are losing interest after years of this. Now I just check the post-match threads. I get shit goes wrong and players are bad or whatever happens, but it does drain the interest in narratives as people get disappeared in record time. Throw in the seemingly random benchings and we have a clusterfuck. Champions Queue is a step in the right direction towards growing NA talent, or at least recognizing it, so we will see where that goes, and hopefully we have some hidden talent to see in coming years. I think this really raises an interesting discussion about how regular roster changes are not just potentially detrimental for the development of a team and their performance, but also the identity and the ability to garner investment in those teams. As Stop Taking My Data noted, what is the point in losing your ability to have a fan base grow if actually the trade-off isn't even that you're going to be performing that well after all these roster swaps anyway? I was actually really interested to know what my audience thought about this, so I did a tweet asking people if they would be likely to remain a fan of a team if they regularly change their roster, and the overwhelming majority of responses claimed that they were way more likely to follow players than they were teams, and so they wouldn't have any allegiance to these rosters. I think it's quite common knowledge that teams for organizations are at best not lucrative and at worst total cash hemorrhage. So it is definitely within an organization's best interests to be able to build brands around the rosters that they have and keep the audiences engaged and caring. I think a really great example of this would be Optic from Call of Duty, who are by far and away the most popular team of all time. Over the entire course of the life cycle of Call of Duty to the present, they built some of the most iconic players in all of esports, Scump being a massive one. He had some time on and off the roster, but he was still always associated with being the Optic guy. It also meant that when Crimsix, who was one of the most epical players for Optic, when he actually left for their rival, it was one of the biggest storylines and narratives that was present in Call of Duty, and people remained engaged. They wanted to hear about this story and see how this rivalry ensued because of their, you know, already developed investment in this team and this player. But it's also worth mentioning that this should be a vested interest for the league as well as just the teams themselves, because teams with very little brand value and ever-changing rosters are going to really struggle to retain viewership and encourage investment. I don't think fandom can really be built from a lack of consistency and a real superficial identity. If someone says to you, what is the identity of this team? What makes them them? And you can't really come up with a solid answer because they keep changing things. I don't think that's something that's really beneficial either to the team itself or to the league in which they're playing. I think what you'll find there is the audience will drift in and out of the games that they want to watch. They'll maybe follow individual players, not really caring what teams they're on, and they won't have any real allegiance or passion for the league that they're actually watching, which is not beneficial. And when you combine the issues of committing to developing the performance of your team through the bad times, but also building a team identity with the content and the brand that you build around those players, what you end up with is amazing storylines, especially of redemption arcs and teams who have come back from maybe not having the best time, but they've surmounted those problems. TSM and Rainbow Six have kept their roster almost exactly the same since 2019, and despite their dips into poor performance, they actually come out the other side as world champions. They've kept and developed their franchise players like Bolo. Pojo Man remained a part of the org as a coach when he made room for Charla to join as an active player. And then you look at someone like Merc, who went from this prodigy young gunner to having, quite a bit of criticism thrown his way when he was in a period of not as good performance, to now being a world champion IGL. Even if you look at a team like the original Shanghai Dragons from the Overwatch League, so we're looking back at 2018, they went 0-40 for that first season, which I believe is still the worst losing streak in the history of sports, but they still remained one of the most popular teams in the entire league because they stuck to what they were doing. People became really invested in their story, even though they played like literal fucking shit. I'm definitely not anti-roster changes, and I think that it is very important that teams are constantly looking for how it is they should improve, making note of how the chemistry is within the server and what the actual root problem of their issues is. And sometimes the truth is the set of players that you have are not the right set of players to be playing together, or there just is a problem with chemistry, there is a problem with someone's performance simply isn't good enough anymore. But I think that the important thing is that this is not like an annual occurrence. You can make small roster changes here and there, bring a new player in, switch one player out, but a complete roster change that actually affects the core of the team, very regular roster changes, I don't think are conducive to success for individual players, for the team, nor for the league in which they play. I think fandom engagement in esports is incredibly important, and I highly doubt that there's anyone who's running an esports org who would think otherwise, because they're the ones who've got to make the money out of it, not me. And especially with relatively new esports like Valorant, I think it's very exciting to see how that fandom is getting built and where those investments from the audience are coming in. Now, I'm not going to claim to be any expert on what is happening in the LCS, just to go back to the Reddit post that I saw, but if those assertions by Reddit commenters are correct, which oftentimes Reddit commenters are missing parts of the story, I would I would hope that Valorant is not going to end up in a place where that is what people think is the primary issue. I'm very excited to see the development and the building of these players and these teams and their stories and who you're invested in. I mean, I know what my favorite teams in Valorant are, and if they started to break apart, I would be gutted. I would be so sad, because it's not just that I care about this player or this player, it's that I specifically like seeing them with those teams, and I like watching the journey of that team as they go through their adventure into becoming a great team in Valorant. I understand that teams still obviously want to perform well. Like, the whole point of being a team is you want to be the best in the world and you want to make the money that comes with that. I know for players it's not necessarily about the money, but for the people behind the team, it sure as fuck is. So there are definitely different angles to it, and I'm, as I say, definitely not anti-roster changes. I'm not saying teams should never change their rosters. But I think that it's just a kind of pertinent conversation right now because of different roster changes that we're seeing across different esports and the way that different teams are handling it. It's no secret that Carlos is particularly cutthroat when it comes to his own roster changes. He totally blew up his League of Legends team at the end of 2021. He has had these constant switches between Mixwell and Kellogg's in G2, finally leading to the removal of Kellogg's from the roster. So he's been able to find a new home, which is a good thing. And yeah, teams like have these kinds of attitudes. This sort of thing happens. But I actually love it when teams come out the other side, performing really well, building something great that the audience, the fans can be invested in and want to see more of. I want to buy your merch. I want to rep your team and talk about how exciting your team and your brand is. Like, because you could either be talking about the individual who has so much brand value and whatever, or I could be talking about how awesome your team are. And I think that anyone who is a fan of any kind of sports knows how good it feels to feel like you have loyalty to a team and that they are the ones that you stick by through thick and thin. And I hope that this is something that a lot of teams recognize and they commit to their rosters, commit to developing them, and build an era for whatever it is they're doing. Anyway, I'm very curious to know what all of your thoughts are. How do you feel about following players versus teams? And what would a team have to do for you to really feel invested in the team particularly, rather than just one guy on the roster and follow him around everywhere? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.